I stood in front of the side entrance of the Blackwood estate, my fingers resting on the cold brass handle, and for a brief moment I considered turning around. Not because I was afraid, but because I already knew how this evening would unfold. Inside that house, I was not a man. I was a category, a background, a problem to be tolerated. My name is Richard Hale. I am 56 years old. I built my life from nothing, brick by brick, contract by contract, failure by failure. I started with no money, no connections, and no safety net. Every step forward cost time, mistakes, and sleepless nights. And yet, to the people behind that door, I was simple. That was the word my daughter-in-law used when she spoke to her mother, unaware that I could hear her voice through the thick wood. Simple, from a different background. Someone they would need patience to endure. They didn't know that my income in a single month exceeded what most of them earned in a year. They didn't know because I made sure my son never knew either. I never hid it out of embarrassment. I hid it out of necessity. That decision was not an accident. Years earlier, when my business finally took off, I learned how quickly success attracts the wrong kind of attention. My former wife's family had mocked my ambitions when I had nothing. They treated my work like a childish fantasy. The moment I succeeded, they returned with open hands and rehearsed smiles. Suddenly, everyone needed help. Loans, investments, opportunities, entitlement disguised as family loyalty. When my wife left, choosing comfort over conviction, I was left alone with a 2-year-old boy and a promise. I promised myself that my son, Ethan, would grow up valuing work over image, character over status. I promised he would never confuse money with worth. I hid my wealth not out of shame, but out of principle. I drove an old car. I wore cheap clothes. I lived modestly. I never complained about it, because none of it felt like sacrifice. Ethan grew up seeing effort, not luxury. He watched me work, solve problems, and keep my word. And it worked. He became independent, intelligent, disciplined. He learned to stand on his own feet. What I didn't anticipate was how easily discipline could turn into insecurity when exposed. To people who worship appearances, that insecurity was the reason I was standing at the side entrance instead of the front door. Inside, the Blackwoods were exactly what I expected. Polished, composed, carefully curated. Their wealth was inherited, their confidence rehearsed. The house itself felt less like a home and more like a museum dedicated to self-admiration. Everything was expensive, symmetrical, and emotionally empty. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls. Men and women who had never questioned their place in the world, because it had been handed to them at birth. A man in formal attire opened the door and hesitated when he saw me, clearly unsure whether I was a guest or staff. That hesitation lasted just long enough to be insulting. I introduced myself. He nodded and led me inside without apology. At the table, my seat was placed slightly away from the center, close enough to be included, far enough to be reminded that I did not belong. Charles Blackwood, the patriarch, shook my hand with a grip meant to establish dominance. His smile was polite but hollow. His wife Margaret offered a brief nod and a smile that never reached her eyes. Their son Lucas barely acknowledged me at all, glancing in my direction as if assessing whether I was worth the effort. My son sat beside his wife Emily, stiff and quiet. He avoided my eyes. I noticed that immediately. It hurt more than I expected. The conversation was polite on the surface, but every word carried judgment. They asked about my work with the detached curiosity one reserves for someone whose answer doesn't matter. When I said consulting, they nodded knowingly, already picturing small, insignificant clients. When Lucas spoke about his visionary app, they listened attentively, as if ambition alone were achievement. They offered me cheaper wine without comment. I noticed the bottle was different, the label less impressive. No one acknowledged it. They suggested old clothes as a kindness, framed as generosity. Margaret mentioned them casually, as if she were offering leftover food. They spoke of pedigree, of levels, of knowing one's place in the world. And my son, said nothing. That silence hurt more than their condescension ever could. Then my phone rang. I answered calmly, stepping slightly away but staying within earshot. I spoke to my assistant about contracts, numbers, deadlines. I didn't exaggerate or boast. I simply spoke the truth. Microsoft, government clearance, multi-million-dollar figures discussed with the same tone I used to order coffee. Routine. Ordinary. When I returned to the table, the air had changed. Charles stared at me as if the room itself had betrayed him. Margaret's composure cracked for the first time, her smile faltering before she forced it back into place. Lucas began typing my name into his phone, his confidence evaporating with every search result. Suddenly, they wanted details. Suddenly, they were interested. Suddenly, I mattered. That was the moment I understood exactly who they were. Respect appeared not because of my character, my restraint, or my patience, but because of my money. The same people who had treated me like an inconvenience now saw opportunity. Their warmth was instant, their curiosity eager, their judgment gone, replaced by calculation. I told them the truth then, calmly, without anger. I reminded them how they had treated me when they thought I was poor, how every assumption, every gesture, every silence had revealed their values without them realizing it. I told them that wealth doesn't change people, it exposes them. Charles tried to pivot, suddenly friendly, suddenly interested in starting over. Margaret tried to apologize, carefully choosing her words. Lucas tried to impress me with questions he didn't understand, using terminology he had only just learned. It was too late that I stood up and left without raising my voice. I didn't need to humiliate them. They had done that themselves. Outside, sitting in my old car, I felt no victory, only disappointment. I hadn't lost my son to marriage. I had nearly lost him to materialism. Ethan followed me. He apologized. He cried. He asked why I had hidden the truth from him. And for the first time, I told him everything. About his mother, about my promise, about my fear that money would distort what mattered. About why I chose to be underestimated rather than worshipped. He listened. Truly listened. Later, Emily joined us. Her shame was real. Not performative, not defensive. She admitted that she had learned to measure people the same way her parents did, by appearances, not substance. She said she didn't want that life anymore. That night became a line in the sand. Ethan chose integrity over approval. Emily chose honesty over comfort. They chose work, humility, and uncertainty, not illusion. Months later, they started from nothing. No shortcuts, no inheritance. They struggled. They failed. They learned. And they were happier than they had ever been pretending to belong to a world built on debt and arrogance. As for me, I still live simply. I still drive the same car. Because money never defined me, but it defined the Blackwoods. And more importantly, it defined my son, not by how much I had, but by the moment he finally remembered who he was meant to be.